All right, there's a lot of things that can set your garden back, but one thing that it's a tough pill to swallow is the gardener can actually set their garden back a fair amount. So I want to kind of touch on that today and see how we can avoid this situation and keep our gardens really just growing as strong and as productive as possible. I'm sure you love growing in your garden and you love your garden and you're thinking to yourself, I would never do anything to slow my garden down. And while that may be absolutely correct, knowingly you would never do this, but we've all done these things and it all just kind of comes to a head. So what are we talking about here? What we're talking about is stressing your plants out, okay? There's a lot of things you can do that actually adds to the stress. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the natural stressors out there and the effects of it, and then we're going to break down and see how we magnify this issue as gardeners. Unknowingly, with good intentions, we do stuff, but it just sets us back. So what is the first thing that really adds stress? We go all the way back to the beginning of the season. I mean, it's the act of planting which causes stress. So we planted these tomatoes and we stressed them out. When we removed them from the pots and we put them in the ground, we stressed them. So we want to minimize that stress, right? Now, how do we go about minimizing stress for, let's just say, these tomato plants, for instance? Well, the first thing is pick the right time of day to plant. So I'm a really big believer in planting at the end of the day. And what that does is you have lower sun angle, so you're getting a plant in the ground, you're getting it in, and then overnight it has time to acclimate, and then it starts a whole new day cycle in the garden. That really gives it time to get a little bit more comfortable and just not basically pull it out of the pot, jam it in, and then have the hottest sun of the day beating down on it. So it just gives it a little bit of time to acclimate. And if you even take it a step further back, it's the act of, if you let your plants get root bound in the pot and then you pull them out, you're really disturbing those roots. So it's just best not to let them get root bound. And that's where the thing that I love talking about the most, which we're going to get into very shortly, is all of your timing is very important. You saw when I pulled these 3 plants out here, they were not excessively root bound at all. The roots were just starting to stretch down. There was still plenty of soil in them, and that's perfect. So we wanted to do that. Now these are older plants and we wanted to do this back row as a test to see how they would produce. Fall tomatoes are kind of a time to just enjoy the process, do a little bit of extra testing. If you get a harvest, great. If you don't, fine. But we really wanted to just kind of see how they go. But these were a little bit root bound, so we're gonna see how they turn out. Now the size difference is nothing more than these are way, way older than those tomatoes. That's the only difference. So time will tell about that. So your planting out really has a big thing to do about it. And so if we take it even a step further and we say, well, what's another natural stressor? Well, another natural stressor is just temperature itself, right? So the heat, look at this, is that time of year. Japanese beetles, the best way to get on top of them is hand picking. It's like you can just really start that process. Now it looks like we're just about to get in a Japanese beetle season. Just started seeing them. But like, for instance, we're having a heat wave right now. There is a lot of stress going on to our plants right now. So you can cool them off, you can do all these things, but the bottom line is they're still adding stress into your garden. And we don't want to magnify that by fiddle farting around with them or anything like that in the middle of a heat wave. So the best thing to do is just take it easy. I'm taking it easy after I do this. I'm pretty much done outside. My goal is not to get incredibly overheated today or anything like that. So I'm going to do the same with my garden. I may come out here in the middle of the day and wet the leaves down just to kind of lower that temperature and the heat of the day. It's not going to hurt the plants. It's not going to cause micro bubbles on them that are going to magnify the heat to burn them or anything like that. So don't worry about that, but that's one thing that we can do to help it. But otherwise, there's just not a whole lot you can do. As far as on the gardener side, the only thing you can really do is you could pick like a more heat tolerant plant. And the jury's out in my mind if a heat tolerant plant's really, really worth it or not. The only thing I think, if I really sit down and think about it, when I think about heat tolerance, I think what it means it's not necessarily that the plant is going to produce more or longer in the heat. I think it can just take the heat more and have less stress, which is kind of what we're talking about here. You can go on the opposite end of that and say the cold. So temperature overall, it's everything that I just said is the exact opposite for cold. So, but that's part of it. Now, let's talk about watering. So water is a big issue with the garden. If you have too much water, it stresses it out. If you have too little water, it stresses it out. And you need to try and find a happy medium. What does this mean? This means don't just follow the weather, know what's going on, know when it rains, know when it doesn't rain, know how hot it gets, adjust your watering to the temperatures outside. Go more, go less. If it's cooler, water less. If it's hotter, water more. If it's drier, water more. All of these things, use that to your advantage, because over the years, thousands of years that we've been farming as a society, as a culture, as a species, we've figured out that yes, we can do more and we can help it on by adding water. Why do you think we spent hundreds of dollars to build an in-ground watering system? Because it makes a huge difference. All right, so let's take a break and talk about what does stress do to a plant. So stress does a lot of things. So if you stress a plant out, well, first of all, in humans, stress can give you a heart attack. It can make your hair fall out, make you lose sleep, and it's like a snowball. It just keeps, the issues get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, it's the same thing here. So in a plant, stress can do a lot of things. It can stunt the growth. It can misform fruit. It can cause fruit to drop completely and not even hold the fruit. It can cause the plant to die. That's the worst case scenario. It can cause a number of issues. And so if you're going through and you're seeing all these different issues on your plants, like let's say your tomato's not producing, well, it could be due to stress. Now, one of the things that we just showed you earlier with the Japanese beetles are pests can cause a lot of stress on a plant. So having some kind of plan, I don't want to even say a regimen, a plan for treating for pests is really important. Man, these skeeters are terrible. Today I'm in coastal North Carolina, and today it's going to be 98 degrees. So we are going to be very careful today, and we're going to understand that there's a lot of stress, but there's a lot of pests too. We're having everything's coming together at once for our garden. So we have the heat, we have the pests, it's dry, we have dry heat, all this stuff, and it's causing issues in the garden. And the only thing we can do is try to help it move along. So the biggest issue I see other than death is going to be stunted growth is what we're really concerned about. So we just want to stay on top of it and make sure that we're encouraging our plants to grow more and grow strong. I'm here and I'll give you two examples in the same garden bed. So here's the damage from the Japanese beetle. And so, all these little micro holes in here and stuff causes stress to this plant. And what the plant's trying to do right now, as we speak, is it's trying to figure out, how do I repair this, right? Well, it can't really repair it. So what it's going to try and do is push more growth out of the plant. So we want to make sure that it can do that. So if this leaf were to get too damaged, we would want to remove this leaf so that the plant wouldn't have to worry about it, and then it could go ahead and produce more. This isn't terrible, but if it got any worse, we would go ahead and remove it. Now for the terrible side, let's look at these squashes. These squashes are done. So after this heat wave, we're gonna pull them out. We've got one more zucchini we're gonna let grow, but you can see all of this damage on here. We can see pests on here, and we can't keep up with them this time of year. There's so many. We could spend all day out here picking them. We could spray, but at this point, it's done. These plants have been done. They're having a lot of stress. So what they're trying to do is, instead of producing fruit, the plant knows, hey, I need to produce leaves in order to create energy, in order to create more fruit. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna stop producing fruits and try and produce leaves. But at this time, we've got an absolute breeding ground for pests. And even though I can't get on top of them, I can't help but pick them and remove them. Squash is a tough one because it's like no matter what you do, you just can't stay on top of the pest. There just comes a point. So like I said, as soon as this heat wave passes and we're not in the upper 90s during the day, which should be next week, we're gonna go ahead and remove them, and we're gonna replant, yes, but we're going to remove them completely out of the garden and just call it what it is, call it good, get a good solid weeding in, and then go from there. Now, that covers the gist of what causes stress. The other issue is lack or too much sun can cause stress to a plant, but we're not gonna worry about that too much. The only thing I would say is just plant appropriately so that you're not getting shade from other plants, right? So for instance, this corn right here is absolutely going to shade this garden bed during the middle of the day, but we welcome that and we plan for that. But if we had tomatoes, there's a reason why you don't see tomatoes back behind there, because then they would get shaded. So, you know, you want to keep that in mind as well. Now to move on to the gardener. So this is a big part of this. I'm going to attempt to go in order, but I'm gonna probably tell you I'm not, but we're just gonna cover all of the ones we just talked about, but now we're gonna put the gardener as the cause of stress. So the first one would be trimming too much. So every time you trim, every time you cut, every time you do anything to a plant, you're causing stress to that plant. So what I like to do is I like to come out here and let's say, I did trim these plants from the bottom, about 6 inches from the bottom. That's all I trimmed for my determinate tomatoes. That's what works best for me. I'm not going to do it any other way, so don't tell me to do it another way. But when I do it all at once. Some people will do it, every couple days, but every time you do that, you're causing stress. So the idea is go ahead, cause the stress, let the plant recover, and then if you have to trim more, wait a couple weeks and then come back and do it again. But the best idea is go ahead and just get it done and let the plant fully recover. So for instance, if I was to take this plant right here, let's say I cut this here, and what you would see is you would see it bush out here as it repairs itself. But if I trim it here today and then it bushes, and then 2 days later I come and I trim it here and it bushes, and here and it bushes, the plant's never really being able to recover from that. And that's something that we think we're doing the right thing, but in the long run, we're actually hurting our plants. Now, if we come over to our squash plants, and let's say I got a wild hair and I didn't know any better. Come back and I say, well, hey, this leaf is pretty bad, let me trim it. And you know how it is, you'll start trimming one, and then you'll find another one, and then you'll find another one, and another one, and another one, and next thing you know, you got 4 leaves on your plants. Well, unfortunately for squash, doesn't matter. These plants are gone, they've done their job, they're moving on to a better life somewhere else in the netherworld. They're gonna be in plant heaven. But if we come out here to this one and we're like, okay, so today we have damage here, and then here, and then here. I mean, next thing you know, you're gonna have 3 leaves on this plant and it's not gonna be able to produce. So you just wanna take it easy and slow down. Now, the other aspect of it too is with pests. So I told you I was gonna try and go in order, but clearly I'm not. But pests, because we were over there, is another thing. So being able to treat, being able to catch these things works out really well. A lot of times people don't want to treat, and that's fine, but you have to understand what's going on with your plant when you make that decision to not treat at all. You're going to be losing a lot of potential growth and harvest off of your plant. So make sure you're doing it. And again, treating doesn't necessarily mean using a chemical. It can be hand picking, it can be trap cropping if that's something you believe in, which I don't really believe in, but that's fine. There's a lot of different things you can do, but know that if you make that decision not to do anything, it's just gonna suffer in the long run. So be careful of what you choose to do, and then just make your plan accordingly. Again, typically squash have a limited lifespan. They don't just keep producing typically. And this really refers to like your summer squashes and stuff. Your winter squash and stuff are totally different. I don't even like that they're called winter squash. They should be called winter something else. I don't know. Melons or and in some countries they're considered pumpkins, which is more attuned to what they are. But it gives you a false idea that it's the same, because summer squash, well, once they start to producing, typically what people do is they'll start another round as soon as they start producing to keep a continuous harvest. We don't do that here because we're waiting for the squash vine borer to come and go, which it has, and then we can make a plan from there. Basically covered watering. So we're not gonna go too terribly deep in it because it's kind of self-explanatory, But understanding your watering, and the only thing that I can really say about watering is if you're using overhead water, you can actually introduce disease from keeping the leaves wet and stuff like that. So in my opinion, if you're not gonna do an in-ground drip system, which I completely understand that you may not wanna do an in-ground drip system, a lot of times what you can do is hand water at the base and just do that. So a lot of the damage you see from our tomatoes over here, and actually these are faring pretty well in the front, but in the back it's because we had like almost 2 weeks of like everyday rain, and it may have only rained for like 15 minutes, but basically the leaves are just consistently wet and humid, and it just caused kind of disease issues, which again, this time of year is really normal, but when we overhead watered, it was magnified. The leaves never got a chance to really dry out. So now they can dry out and they can, you know, kind of keep moving, keep growing, and keep recovering from having dry leaves. And that's what we wanted to do. That was the goal. And this is why I'm a big advocate of having timers, because it's kind of set and forget. You don't skip waterings. You can pause waterings. It's on a schedule, so you know when it's going to go on. It's timed out, so it's very consistent. You know, if the old adage of an inch a week works out well, then you could say that you could measure it out and say, great, but if you're depending on rain, you know, that those 2 weeks, dude, we got like 20 inches of rain in like 2 weeks, you know? So then what do we get after that? Nothing but hot, dry weather. So you can see how it goes. So make sure you're staying on top of your watering to some extent and just keep it very consistent, and you're gonna help lower that stress. Not to mention in the times of heat like this, it cools the roots down, which is really important. One thing I didn't talk about is fruit production is actually stressful to a plant as well. So we wanna make sure as gardeners, like obviously that's what you want is fruit production, but as gardeners, we wanna stay on top of it, right? So if we come over here, we have this okra right here that is not going to be good to eat. So we're actually leaving it to go to seed. It is going to cause stress, but because we missed it, we're just going to grow it, and then we're going to move on and stay continuously harvesting. So like I need to take this one as soon as I turn this video off and really get on top of it. But that way we'll get our harvest and keep it going. But I'm a big seed saver. I'm an opportunistic seed saver. So if something like this occurs, I will save the seed. But right now would not be the time to do that. A lot of times what I aim for is towards the end of the season when I've already gotten a bunch of harvests, I've got my stuff filled up, you know, it's frozen, canned, whatever. That's when I would typically do it. But right now, especially with okra, it's like, hey, let's go ahead and do it. You know what I mean? So we'll get that one and then we'll be good. We'll probably get more after that, but we're just gonna take it one step at a time and just call it good. It's, you know, but it's a natural function of the plant, but it does cause stress. And when you allow it to go to seed, it will stress it even more. And stress, what it really is using up a lot of energy. So just think about that as, you know, it takes a lot of energy to produce a seed. I got to tell y'all, it's humid out today, and I'm wearing one too many layers of clothing. I've only got one layer on, if you know what I'm saying. It's like you just can't get cool. But this kind of goes into the heat portion of it. So what do we do as gardeners to add stress during periods of heat? Well, if you combine everything together, and let's say you're out and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go trim. You know, even though it's in the afternoon and it's cool, but the next day is gonna be just as hot, if not hotter, you're kind of adding that stress to it. So it's best just to stop. Just stop. Don't do any more, okay? Just stop what you're doing and let this weather pass by. It'll come by in a couple days, maybe a week or so, and then you can get back out there and do it. You know, we did that video earlier where we were harvesting everything we could, and we're just continuously harvesting, trying to keep the plants as little stress as possible on it, because that ripening process is very stressful on the plants, like we said before. So when you start getting this heat, you can do that. And then also, I mean, if you have to kind of combine the two together, but there's a reason why we don't add shade to our garden this time of year. Believe it or not, even though we're under extreme heat warnings and all that stuff, it's not overly hot for these plants. And when you start adding stress and you're start adding shade, you start taking away and adding sunlight hours and strengths to it, you can cause stress. If I was convinced that I saw heat damage on my plants and this was just going to keep going and going and it was going to stay hot, we would absolutely do something different. But really, it just doesn't make sense sometimes. And the more you do in the garden, the better. The best thing to do is, you know, these plants, they are made to grow in the summertime and they will be fine, right? And that's another reason why we start a second crop, because we know that as it gets cooler, they will flourish more. But tomato plants and pepper plants and stuff like that will absolutely suffer to some extent during the summertime. But adding shade, removing shade, bumping plants, breaking plants as you're working around them can all cause a headache. I'm not saying don't add shade. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying be careful when you do. I don't think everybody needs to add shade all the time. I think it's a very catchy thing on social media to see a shade garden or a garden with shade all over it. I do think some areas absolutely need shade though. You know, in the Midwest, I'm trying to get my directions right. In the Southwest, absolutely. I know a lot of you do have permanent shade structures up, and that is the way to go. Now, we will employ shade in the late summer to early fall as we get our garden going again for fall. But for right now, we're just gonna let it run, you know? So it's just managing every little bit of stress that you can add to your garden is very important. It's just like in your lives, you know, I'm sure a lot of y'all do yoga and meditate and all that stuff to reduce stress in your life. You go on vacations, same thing here. Let's think about it this way. Right now, during this heat wave, my garden is on vacation. It's a shitty vacation, but they're still on vacation. Goodbye.